All right, everyone. Today we're going to go over how to create your own functions and how to, in programming, but more specifically P5. We're also going to go over what's called a programming object, okay? Or this is also known as object-oriented programming. The first thing we're really going to talk about, though, is how to write P5 without having to go through the P5 editor. Okay. So the P5 editor is a nice way to start and kind of get our feet wet and get used to kind of just programming concepts. But you guys are at a point now we can kind of take the training wheels off and we can start to write our own stuff. Okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to create a HTML document, and I'm assuming you guys know how to do that at this point, and implement it with the P5 library. Okay. So I've already downloaded the files, the drills for today. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a new file here. I'm just going to make a file called test.html. And what I'm going to do is set this up as I would with any other, HTML document. So that means I'm going to add the doc type, HTML, head section, and the body section. Okay. And just to make sure this works, hello world. And I'm going to test this. Okay. That works like any standard HTML document. The next thing we need to do is to allow me to work with the P5 code that we've done, we need to have the P5 library. So I said in earlier modules and videos that JavaScript is actually run by the browser itself. Your browser actually has something called a JavaScript engine. And in fact, if you look under inspect, under console, you can actually do JavaScript right here. So if I were to do 1 plus 1, it gives me a result of 2, okay? So you could actually write JavaScript right here. Now, the thing about it though is P5 is special. It is JavaScript, but it's customized JavaScript. So our browser isn't going to have P5 by default. So what we need to do is install the P5 library so that when I run my file in a browser, it would work. Okay. Now, how do we do that? Good question. I'm going to go to P5js and I'm going to go to where it says download. Okay. So if you go to download, there's an option here that says download complete library. And if I were to do that, it's going to download probably a zip file, which it did. And inside the zip file, you can see I get these files called P5js and P5.min.js. And if I actually take this into a coding program, this is the P5 actual library. You'll notice that it actually has some of the things that we've been talking about. Like here, they're creating a variable called G. There's if-else statements. There's some other things going on here that I don't really want to talk about. There's a lot of code, okay? It actually has some things about building their own functions, which we'll talk about today, okay? You could also download it as a single file. So if I click on this, you can see I get a file downloaded to my computer called p5.js. Now, what you would do is I would take this and put it into my project folder. Okay. So for instance, if here are the files that I'm working with. I don't know where my test file went. Oh, there it is, test file. I would want to drag and drop the P5 library into that. Now, I actually already have a copy for you, but if you were starting from scratch, you would download the file and put it into your project root folder, just like you would with an image or anything else. So what I need to do is if I want to, I now what I want to do is I want to install or I want to reference that P5 library. Okay. The way we do this is in the head section of your document, we're going to use a tag called script. Okay. It's an open, it's a regular tag, which means it has an opening tag and a closing tag. The most important part is there's an attribute called source. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to connect that to the P5 library. Once again, file management is a key and naming things is a key. So, in this case, my P5 library and my HTML are in the same folder, so I don't have to do any subfolders or anything like that. My file is called P5, lowercase, so I type in P5, lowercase, okay? And there you go. What I've essentially done is I have an HTML document, which is this one, and we just connected it to the P5 library, like the literal file. Okay. So now my HTML document is getting all of that P5 information. Now that's half the battle, okay, is connecting the library. What I need to do now is actually write my own script. So I'm going to make a second script like this. And this is going to be the area that I'm going to write JavaScript. Okay. Now you might remember when we were working in P5, we kind of had this default kind of setup, right? Where there was a function setup, function draw. I'm going to have to do that again here. So what I'm going to do is say function setup. And I'm also going to do function draw, just like we did when we used the online edit. The syntax has to be simple. Now what I'm going to do is, well, what happens when we do function setup? Well, we use the create canvas function to create a canvas, and then we usually use background to give it some sort of color. So what I'm going to do is say, okay, let's create canvas. I'll make it 400 pixels by 400 pixels. And let's give it a background of yellow. Okay. Now, one thing you have to note is that when you write your own code, you have to connect to the library first before you can use your script. Now, why is that? So create canvas and background, they're not functions in normal run-of-the-mill everyday JavaScript. They are functions that are built into the P5 library. So if you were to put this first, like I'm doing right now, the problem is you're calling functions that haven't been that aren't connected to the document yet, and that can cause problems because it's like the browser's going to try to run the code and it's going to say, create canvas. It's like, well, I don't know what create canvas is. We don't have a function called create canvas. So if we do it like this connects it first, then we have a function, then it, somewhere in my P5 library, I'm too lazy, but I'm sure somewhere there's a function called create canvas. There it is. Probably not that. Okay. I'm way too lazy to go through 415 references here, but you get the idea that it's like somewhere in this code that exists, right? And so this should now work. And if I right click and I go to open, I get my browser. Or if I want to start putting in things like circles, just like we've been doing, and squares, all of this should now work. So if I save and I go back, this is just a regular browser. There's my code. Okay. So that was my, example there. Redo it here, but this was me creating a file from scratch with HTML, adding in the P5 script and writing my own code. If you want me to do it here, I could do, the same thing. This is what yours is going to look like. Script src equals P5js. And then write a script. all of this should be within the head section. Function setup. Background. And then we do need to have the function draw. Even if you don't use it, the P5 code requires it being there, even if it's not used. You're going to get an error message if you don't do that. Okay. All right. So that is, downloading the library, P5 library, and then, using it ourselves. There's another way to do this. Okay. And this method is called a content delivery network. Okay. Now, the way I try to explain it, and try to use like Sketch. I wish I had like a better drawing board I could just kind of use really quickly. But in the last example, you guys have a root folder, right? And then you have an HTML file. And then you had the P5js file, right? And then you connected the HTML to the P5, right? But let's imagine that rather than you having a copy of the P5js, someone else had a copy of it or storage of it. Let's say there's like another website somewhere on the internet that has a copy of it. Okay. And rather than connecting to the file in your computer, you connect to the file on someone else's computer. Okay, so I'm going to go in here. We're going to connect this HTML to this P5 that's stored online. This is what's called a content delivery network. Okay, also known as a CDN. Okay. And what a content delivery network does is it lets you connect to code that's stored online. This isn't just for P5. This actually can be for a lot of code. The reason why you might want to use a CDN is, well, it requires less files in your project since you can just reference someone else's. That means your project folder will be smaller, less time to download. A lot of times these computers that store the file are optimized so that people who are downloading the file from different parts of the world, they're getting the fastest, most efficient version of the file. The downside of using a CDN is because you aren't storing the code, you don't have no control of the code. Okay. Now, a lot of these CDNs, they don't change anything, but I can't guarantee you that they won't. So that is something to be concerned with. And of course, if the owner were to take down that file, your reference isn't going to work anymore. So like I said, it's like traditionally you might connect your file to the P5. Here you're connecting it to some other computer that has a copy of the file. Okay. Now, what you could do is I'm going to go back and under downloads, see where it says use P5 from CDN. Okay. And what I'm going to do is take this and I'm going to copy it. And what I'm going to do is let's go to exercise 2. And I'm going to install the P5 library. So I'm going to come in here. Let's do script. Oops, not like that, but like this. Okay. And let's do src. And I'm going to paste in that URL. And you'll notice it goes to this, it says cdn.js deliver, blah, blah, blah. This is a computer I have no idea where it is, but it's storing a copy of P5. And this is actually the version of P5 1.11 or 1.11. And I'm actually download. So what happens is when this web page runs, it's going to load in, this tells it to go to somewhere else on the internet, go get that file and come back. Okay. What I'm going to do now is now that the P5 library has been installed. Oops, did I mess up something? I need to close this out. Okay. Here's my script tag. Once again, you should install the P5 before you write your own P5 code. I am going to write function setup and function raw. Let's do a create canvas. And let's add a background color, funsies. All right. So I have this web page. This tells it to go get the P5 library from this location on the internet. That installs the P5 library, lets the browser use the P5 library and all the code that's in it. And then I'm using some of those or some of the functions I'm using here. If I did that correctly, which I believe I did, if I preview this page, I get that. Okay. And if I were to come into here and add circles and such, oops. Save, refresh, and there's my page. Okay. All right, the last thing is you'll notice when I'm writing my own script here, I'm doing it within the web page. Okay, like this is actually a sub. So, in the same way we had like internal, external CSS, right? So like you can have an HTML document and you can have CSS as part of your document, but a lot of times people will make it a separate file, right? Well, in the same way, right now my JavaScript that I'm writing is in my HTML file, but I might want to make it a separate file that I can link to. Why would you want to do that? There's a couple reasons. Some people don't like mixing HTML and JavaScript together because it gets kind of confusing. You may want to apply that JavaScript to multiple pages in the same way you apply CSS to multiple web pages. You may want to apply the JavaScript to multiple web pages. And so therefore having it as a standalone document might be easier for it. Okay. You don't have to do this. This is just an option that you could do if you want to do this. Okay. So what I'm going to do is here in exercise 3, I've actually already set up, or I'm already using a CDN to install the JavaScript. And what I'm going to do is build my own JavaScript file. So I'm just going to make a new file and I'm going to save it. And you can call this file whatever you want, but I'm going to call, make sure it has the extension .js. .js tells the browser that this is a JavaScript file. And I'm going to call it script. Let's call it, I don't know, my document.js. Okay. So, you can see that it's a blank file, right? There it is. Mine has a little JS icon on it. What I'm going to do is come into here and I'm going to write function setup. Create canvas, 400, 400. And background. I don't know what color haven't I used yet. Aqua. Function draw. Okay. And I'm going to save. And if I were to preview this file, nothing is happening, right? You can see that. So what's going on? I have my HTML file. I have my JavaScript file. What's the problem? Well, remember when we had a HTML file and a CSS file and they weren't defaultly talking to each other? That's kind of the same problem here, okay? So we have a JavaScript file and it's written correctly. The code is correct. The problem is that my HTML document isn't defaultly referencing it. So how do I get my document, my HTML document, to reference that JavaScript? Well, what I'm going to do is come into here, write script, just like we did before. So And what I need to do now, I keep doing that. I keep putting what do you call it? Question mark instead of a closing tag. So what I'm gonna do here is type in src, and I want to reference this file. Okay. So in this case, it's called my document, all lowercase. Just like with images and CSS, it's case sensitive. Okay. So this is now, this script is going to get the P5 library. This is getting the JavaScript code, P5 code that's in here, and bringing it all into my HTML file. If I save and preview this, now it works. Okay. So do you have to create a separate CSS or sorry, JavaScript file? No, you don't have to, but some people, like I said, like it. If I were to set this up as a here, I'm going to put the HTML in one file, and I'm going to put the JavaScript over here. This kind of allows me to look at both at the same time in case you care about that. So maybe I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, okay, aqua, let's put in, oops, nope, not that, but circle, square. Actually, let's throw in an if statement. If, I don't know, let's make a variable. If x, oh, sorry, let x equal 5. If x is more than 1, let's build a square. So I'm just kind of using all the various things we've talked about. All right, let's do a little Blackboard math here. Okay, we got a variable 5. Is 5 more than 1? True. So then this runs. So I should get the square to run. This should run regardless. I don't have anything in the draw here, but I could if I wanted to. Now, when you run this, you have to run the HTML file, not the JavaScript. JavaScript by itself doesn't run visually in the browser. Only HTML does. I'm going to go back here and let's run it. Okay. And there you go. Sorry, I think it was on a different, I have 2 screens going on. So hopefully you saw that, but it is working. Okay. And this is how we write, you guys can kind of take the training wheels off. You don't have to use the P5 editor. You can, write using, Visual Studio Code or whatever coding program you want to do. You can still do all the P5 stuff. You just have to just, install a library. I recommend doing the CDN because I'm lazy, but you can also attach it to the actual. You can put your stuff in a separate file if that makes your life easier. I kind of like it that way personally, but everyone's different. As long as it works, that's how this goes. Okay.